You refuse to make this easy for me, he said bitterly, gripping the bedpost. You haven't exactly been the perfect partner yourself, dear, she snapped back. He slammed his hand down on the mattress. But I tried. I did all that stupid stuff you asked for. Dinners, love texts, even bought you that damn desk to show you I support your writing. What have you done, India? Have you ever sacrificed for us? Oh, don't start. You did all of that after I left, not before. And I spent 15 years in a marriage with a man who thinks creatives are just hippies dressed like Harry Potter. Don't tell me about sacrifice, Greg. I begged you to come to countless open mics, and I quit the role of a lifetime just to make you feel like a man. So stop the pity party. His face darkened. You're in love with him. Oh, God, she shouted, rolling her eyes as she stormed toward the door. This back and forth exhausted her. Pretending things were fine had been their coping mechanism for years. Fake smiles to ease the ache of a dying marriage. But this argument felt different. It was final, like the moment before glass shatters. When the divine route detours. God needs me here. She had repeated the sentence every morning to herself as she greeted the sun on the balcony. She started spiking her morning tea. Nothing heavy, just a shot of liquor to take the edge off. She had chosen to go back to the home she and Greg shared for many years. Back to Greg, back to the routine, back to a house that felt cold. The call to the divine route had scared her. Something about the words collision, death, and God needs you there sounded too serious to ignore. So, when Greg came back around, tearful, changed, ready, she took it as divine instruction. She thought obedience would bring peace. But obedience without joy is its own kind of slow death. She smiled through family brunches, gulped the wine at date night dinners, but cried in the shower every night. Pretended she didn't flinch every time she passed a stage or heard someone freestyle. Greg tried, at least, in the way he knew how. He asked fewer questions, took her on more dates, even bought her a desk to start writing again. But he never saw her, not the way Jante did. And when she'd accidentally catch herself smiling too long at nothing, she knew it was because he had been thinking of her too. Jante, the man she never had, the man she always felt. They hadn't spoken since that night. But some souls don't require contact to stay in connection. And hers whispered his name in the quiet, especially on nights when her heart ached in places Greg never even touched. Jante had stayed true to his path. No late night texts, no checking her socials, no soft spots left for Chantel. After that divine route call, he felt released. She's your wrong turn, the host had said, and for once, he believed it before needing another heartbreak to prove it. He spent his weekends with Rennie, built routines around poetry and parenting. Healing wasn't loud. It was quiet, slow, and intentional. Then Chantel texted, I'll drop Rennie off around 2. Let's meet at the cafe. Easier than the house. Seemed reasonable. Chantel had took a while, but eventually she started picking up Rennie, attempting to co-parent the best she could after leaving them for almost a year. Co-parenting was never going to be clean, but it had its rhythms. When Jante walked into the local bookstore cafe at 2:07, he expected to see Rennie. Maybe coloring, maybe sipping cocoa, probably asking to stop for ice cream on the way. But it was just Chantel. Sitting alone. No Rennie. She with your mom? He asked, cautiously, still standing. Chantel smiled, cool and familiar. No, I left her at home. I thought we could talk first. His expression hardened. That wasn't the agreement. I just needed a minute with you. She stood, smoothing down her blouse, stepping in like old times. He didn't budge. She reached for his hand. I miss you. Not just Rennie. You. Us. There is no us, Chantal. And don't use our daughter as a pawn to get me alone. She tilted her head, a pout forming. So you really feel nothing now? I feel peace. I'm not trading that for flashbacks and false hope. She moved closer anyway, chest almost touching his. Her perfume hit first. Sweet, seductive, calculated. I didn't come here to argue, she whispered. I just wanted to see if there's still something between us. Her hand slid to his chest. Her lips hovered far too close. He stepped back. Chantal. His voice was steady, unmoved. Her smile faded quickly, replaced by the bitterness he remembered too well. I don't know who you think you are now, but don't forget who loved you first. I'm not forgetting, he said. I'm just finally choosing myself. She blinked, grabbed her purse, and stormed past him without a word. And Jante stood still, heart racing, not with confusion, but with clarity. He wasn't shaken. He wasn't tempted. He had just passed the test. He once mistook Chantel's chaos for chemistry, but not anymore. A premonition of love. It had been months since India stepped foot inside the Grand Lyric Theater. This beautiful place that once felt like a sacred space for talent now only reminded her of the betrayal she continued to inflict on herself. She'd taken a long leave to digest everything she had buried deep just to stay married to Greg. After experiencing what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, she couldn't go back to merely being tolerated without losing herself again. So she stepped down from her position as creative director at the theater, regretfully. Greg tried to hide his happiness, but he reveled in her decision. He offered fake apologies and gentle sentiments like, I know this is hard for you, followed by more date nights and midnight talks meant to ease the ache. He thought that would fix it. It didn't. India walked into the theater in pieces. Her hair was done, nails and makeup near perfect, and her outfit was a work of art, but her soul was in shambles. She missed being at the head of it all, directing, planning, creating, but she knew that part of her life was over. So, she inhaled regret and exhaled acceptance as she took her seat beside one of her former managers to enjoy the evening's play. The actors moved effortlessly on stage, every line and note delivered with crisp precision, pulling reactions from the audience like puppet strings. India laughed at moments, but she drifted in and out of her thought. How have you been? Her former employee asked, leaning over to touch her leg with genuine concern. India wanted to be honest, to admit she felt barely there. But she smiled and nodded. Fine, thank you, she replied, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. He told me to tell you hi, her colleague said. India's spine straightened instantly. Who? She asked, pretending not to know. Jante, she whispered. I saw him at the last event. We'll talk after the show. India's pulse quickened. Anxiety, excitement, anticipation, all tangled in a divine second. She didn't hear another word of the play. Her mind was already at that last event. She had only heard bits and pieces, rumors, half-truths, fragments from mutual acquaintances, but Now it seemed she was about to hear it all. When the show ended, she and Shannon parted for a while. Nearly an hour later, they met again in the empty lobby. Shannon's expression said everything. Lips pressed tight, head tilted, hands shoved deep in her pockets. "Before I start running my mouth," she said carefully, "did you even hear anything about it?" "I heard some things," India said softly. "Only bits and pieces." "I've never seen him like that before," Shannon said. "He's always so smooth, so prepared. But that night, he fumbled almost every word in his piece." "Does anybody know what happened?" India asked, her voice low but weighted with concern. Shannon glanced around, then leaned closer until their shoulders almost touched. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He started acting off when I told him you weren't working here anymore. I can't be sure, but there was a shift. And I think the piece he read that night was meant for you." Her heart sank deep in the pit of her regret. "Jesus," she exhaled, guilt and longing clashing in her chest. "Talk to him," Shannon urged gently. "It's not that he did anything wrong," India said. "It's me. My life is a mess, and I can't afford more confusion." Shannon's gaze sharpened. "India, I've seen confusion before, and it's not with him. It's in your marriage." India sighed. "Maybe, but revisiting this connection right now would push me in a direction I'm not ready for." Shannon nodded, then took out her phone. "Here," she said, sending a link. "The Divine Route is doing a live event in 2 weeks. I know you already called in once, but you can never have too much clarity." She placed a hand on India's shoulder before walking away. India stared at the notification glowing on her screen. The event link. Her stomach fluttered with nerves as her fingers hovered over the sign up button. Then, finally, she pressed it. A quiet alignment. Weeks had passed since that tense cafe meeting, and Jante had thrown himself into writing and raising Rennie with steady hand. He kept his distance from Chantel's chaos, pouring his restless energy into verses and rhymes instead. Especially after that humiliating night at the Grand Lyric Theater a few months back. He'd been fresh out of his breakup with Chantel and secretly excited at the chance to see India at the event that evening. She was easy to talk to, and her energy always steadied him. But she didn't show. When he later heard she had resigned from her position, he nearly lost his footing, wondering if he had anything to do with it. Still, he got on stage, scanning the crowd for her face, and when he didn't find it, every word of his poem stumbled. That night, Jante realized he was more invested in their connection than he had ever allowed himself to believe. Now, sitting in a cafe on the corner near his new apartment, Jante wrote quietly as he waited for Rennie to get out of school. His daily ritual of self-care. The smell of roasted beans and cinnamon hung in the air as he scribbled verse after verse in his leather journal, trying to translate the ache of distance into something beautiful. A notification flashed on his phone. A message from a friend with the link. The Divine Route Live. Sign up now. He stared at it for a long moment. He had spoken to the host once before, right after the devastation with Chantel. The call had given him clarity, confirmation that Chantel was the wrong turn, and not his final merge. The host even mentioned that his true connection was already in his orbit. He wanted to believe that connection was India, but she was married. And after ending a 12-year relationship, he knew better than to cling too tightly to the idea of fate. Still, he couldn't shake the thought. He filled out the sign-up form anyway, seeking clarity more than answers. Just as he hit submit, his phone buzzed again. Maya, an old friend and fellow poet. Someone who knew both his story and India's. "Hey, Jante, I'm putting together a new project, and I think you and India could make one hell of a team. You two should meet up to talk about it. How's Thursday?" Jante stared at the screen, a small spark flickering behind his tired eyes. India. Her name alone carried the weight of everything unresolved, complicated, sacred. Maya's message felt like a lifeline tossed across an endless space. He typed back simply, "Sounds great." Across town, India stared at her own phone, fingers hovering above the same text. She bit her lip, her pulse quickening. Then she typed, "I'm in." Neither knew what this collaboration would awaken, but both felt it. The quiet pull of something new. A chance to create, to heal, to align. Sacred energy. He saw her pull into the theater parking lot. A brand new truck roaring, sounding far healthier than the one he'd pronounced dead before the divine dinner months ago. India stepped out, tucking a lock behind her ear as she murmured to herself. He could tell she was overthinking. She always did when she was nervous. But he didn't mind. He admired the soft parting of her lips, the grace of her hand gestures, the silky tone of her voice as she tried to self-soothe. She was nervous to see him again. Truthfully, he was nervous too. He stayed hidden, sitting quietly until she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Everything will be fine, India." He chuckled under his breath, charmed by the innocence in her self-talk. He waited a few more minutes before going inside. For a moment, he almost backed out, started the engine, buckled his seatbelt, but the thought of how badly his last performance had gone stopped him. Maybe this meeting could bring some inspiration, even if it was temporary. It was worth it. Inside, the studio was quiet except for the soft hum of a space heater and the faint scratch of a pen on paper. India sat at one end of a worn wooden table, notebook open but untouched, her eyes tracing the words Jante had just read aloud. He stood by the window, voice low and steady, weaving lines that felt both raw and hopeful. For a moment, the room held its breath. India cleared her throat and softly offered her own verse, a reflection, a response. Her voice was cautious, hesitant, but every word hung between them like a sacred thread. The tension in the room began to shift, thawing into something fragile but alive. Jante smiled, his eyes brightening. He picked up the rhythm again, adding flourishes that lifted her lines higher, coloring them with new light. Minutes blurred into hours. Their verses began to move together, finishing each other's thoughts, sparking images neither could have imagined alone. It was effortless, natural, sacred. At the door, Maya leaned quietly against the frame, watching. She saw how their energy blended, how their sparks collided and bloomed into something electric. Later, she pulled them aside, eyes shining. "You two don't see it yet, do you? The way you move together, finishing lines, feeding off each other's rhythm, is like you're made for this. This isn't just poetry," she said, smiling softly. "It's divine. You're not just creating art. You're elevating each other." India and Jante exchanged a glance, part surprise, part something unspoken. Maybe she was right. Maybe this collaboration wasn't just creative. Maybe it was the beginning of something sacred, slow, and undeniable. First, performance. The night of their debut as a duo arrived like a whispered promise. The small venue buzzed with anticipation. A tight-knit crowd gathered in the dim light of exposed bowls and vintage posters. India and Jante stood side by side behind the mic, their notebooks clasped in hand, hearts pounding in sync. The air between them was electric but gentle, as if the universe itself held its breath. They began with the piece born from their studio sessions, a seamless blend of their voices, their stories intertwined. Their words rolled over the crowd like waves, each verse a call and response, a conversation spoken in rhythm and rhyme. When they finished, the applause was thunderous. not just for the poetry, but for the palpable connection they shared. Their eyes met, smiles blooming, a quiet acknowledgement of what they'd found in each other's responses. The breaking point. India and Jante sat in the loudest silence known since the day the earth was created and only God himself existed. Maya had been chatting them up about possibilities, a tour, publishing deal, exposure. Jante seemed excited by it all. India, not so much. He could tell. She spent most of the meeting biting her lip and tapping her foot. Her energy was restless, anxious, like she was trying to outrun her own thoughts. This sounds like a lot, she finally said, wringing her hands as she paced back and forth, her heels striking the hardwood floor sharply. What's wrong with having a lot? Jante asked, his tone calm but probing. Don't you think you deserve this? She ignored him. His voice alone was a contradiction, one she enjoyed but refused to indulge in. This is a great opportunity, India, he continued, leaning forward. One we both deserve. Let's just weigh the pros and cons before writing it off, yeah? We? She snapped, stopping mid-pace. We are a team, he replied, eyebrows arched in frustration. That means we have to consider each other's position before refusing or accepting anything. I don't need you to tell me how to be an adult. Thank you, she shot back, voice tight. Jante exhaled hard, crossed one leg over the other, and tossed his locks back to calm himself. He didn't want to argue. Not anymore. He'd done enough of that with Chantel. But something about this moment, about her, was triggering. Okay. Maya finally stepped in, like a referee calling time. We've got some time before the contract needs to be signed. No decisions today. But before the end of the month, we need clarity. Just remember, this is a team decision, but the Grand Lyric's reputation is on the line here too. India sank back into her seat, the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. It's not just our careers, India, Jante said, his voice softening but still firm. It's the staff, the theater owners, the poets who count on these events for work. That's a lot of people to disappoint. I still have to do what's best for me and my family, she replied coldly. And everyone else can just suffer, right? He snapped. Your hostility is directed at the wrong person, she warned. Maybe, he said, standing and grabbing his coat. Or maybe it's directed at the right one. No, she said, rising too. I don't have to put up with this. But you put up with a partner who refuses to see you, he fired back. Who makes you feel guilty for your talent? Who punishes you for being bigger than him? And yet you stay. Why is this moment any different? Maya covered her face with the magazine, sinking into her chair. She wanted no parts of this. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. India's voice sharpened, her tone cold and precise. Not everyone whose relationship is hard needs to quit. I'm doing the right thing, something Chantel should have done. But I see there's a side of you most people don't experience, one that shows up when you don't get what you want. Maybe you should take some of the blame for why she went looking for love elsewhere. Her words hit him square in the chest. The room fell silent. Tempers peaked. They both stormed out. No resolution, no plan, no promise to reconnect. Just two broken souls retreating to lick the wounds. Jante sped off the lot. India stomped to her trunk, laying her head on the steering wheel as she screamed the nastiest words she could muster into the empty air. This was the ache of two souls bound and burning, wanting better for each other, but unable to see it without tearing themselves apart. Restless nights. Jante couldn't sleep. His heart felt heavy enough to weigh down his entire chest. The ache making breathing damn near impossible. Eating felt like a chore, and his legs were too heavy to walk on. He spent his days pushing through work, errands, playtime with Rennie. But when night came, He'd pull the blanket over his head and drift off into a scrolling coma on his phone. He, India, and Maya hadn't spoken since that night. Maya had expressed her disappointment about the petty back and forth in a group text, but neither he nor India replied. He was angry, triggered, affected. There was something about India, her presence, her calm, her bright spirit, that set her apart from most. But that day, her energy had been frantic, chaotic, much like Chantel's. He didn't know how to handle it without slipping into old habits. Defensiveness, retreat, all the shadow work, all the therapy, gone in an instant. He hated the way it ended, the way her hurt mirrored his, and he couldn't tell if his frustration came from her hesitation to accept the opportunity or from her decision to quit the grand lyric altogether. His mind had been a storm ever since, his heart heavy with grief, not just from the argument, but from all the words left unsaid between them. He couldn't explain what he felt for India, or the divine energy that always seemed to hum in the air when they were near, but he knew he longed to explore it, even if he had to give her the space to choose her own path. That night he sat up in bed, the glow of his phone screen painting his face blue. He'd been stuck on a single phrase ever since that dinner, the last time he saw her before learning she'd resigned. That's us. Those two words circled his mind like a mantra. He whispered them aloud, testing their weight. That's us. That's us. That's us. But it felt wrong to type. He needed to feel the words, to shape them by hand. He reached for his worn journal in the nightstand, flipping to a blank page, pen in hand. He started to write, leaving wide, open spaces between verses where the words hadn't yet arrived. All the while, he kept reciting softly, "That's us," with a rhythm that pulsed through him like a heartbeat. Could this be a poem forming itself, or a connection finding its language? Across town, India couldn't sleep either. Her anxiety was alive in her legs, bouncing, twitching against the mattress. She ran her fingers through her locks again and again. She and Jante had felt sacred before that fight. But the argument, it shook something. He was triggered, sure, but she refused to shoulder all the blame. She'd made the right decision for her family, the one he'd make for his. Greg lay next to her, snoring softly, one arm sprawled across the bed. Every now and then he'd reach for her leg and hold it still, his way of asking her to stop fidgeting. But he never once asked why she couldn't be still. She couldn't lie there another minute. Quietly, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and walked toward the balcony. Her head hung low, eyes lower. When she opened the glass door, the night air met her like a soft, familiar friend. The wind kissed her cheek as she stepped outside, easing into the chair and crossing her legs. Above her, the moon and the stars seemed so content. Like even if God had written them apart, they'd still find a way to meet again on another planet. Like the color green on a leaf or wood on a tree, the softness of a lover's lips, the curve of a woman's hips. India felt it then, that familiar creative stirring, the one that always showed up right in the middle of her anxious moment. Her right hand tingled, and the words began to form in her mind before she could stop them. She grabbed her balcony journal and began writing frantically, skipping lines whenever the words failed to come fast enough. The moon and the stars seemed so content. Like even if God had written them apart, they would have found each other anyway. Like the color green on a leaf, or wood on a tree, the softness of a lover's lips, and the curve of a woman's hips. By the time she finished, her eyelids grew heavy. She dropped her head onto the table, and for the first time in days, she slept like a baby. The collision. Jante in India awoke the next morning filled with panic and fear. The news anchor sat outside the Velvet Room Event Center, the location where the Divine Route Live had taken place. Apparently, a shooting occurred this evening during a live event for a very controversial podcast, one that looks into the futures of couples and tells them if they're right or wrong for each other. 6 couples were involved in a violent exchange and 2 people were shot. One is severely injured, the other pronounced dead at the scene. Sources tell us the event is still taking place, but with tightened security measures and background checks for all participants. The host appeared on screen, visibly shaken, wearing an oversized coat that seemed to belong to the tall man beside her, a broad-shouldered figure with a deadly calm expression. "This is the first time we've ever had a shooting at one of our events, let alone a death," she said, voice trembling. "Our hearts and prayers are with the family of the woman who was shot, and we will make sure this never happens again." As she spoke, security gently guided her away from the microphone and back inside the building. India stood frozen in front of the TV. "Can you believe this?" she said to Greg as she poured the milk for their son and spread jam on their daughter's toast. "Yeah, that's pretty messy," Greg replied without looking up, fingers flying across his phone, probably sending last night's sales numbers to his manager. "Messy? A woman died, Greg. People are saying she might have been pregnant," India said, her voice breaking. "Yeah, well, that's what happens when you play in people's relationships," Greg muttered. "The host is lucky she didn't get hurt." India flinched at the callousness of his words. "She's just doing her job, Greg. That's cold, even for you." That was his wife, India. That's not a game for most men. She played with fire and got burned. Honestly, she should cancel the whole thing, but she's still going even after a death. Shows you what her motivation is. Money. India slammed the knife down on the counter. "That's so mean, Greg." She stomped out of the kitchen, heels pounding against the hardwood, but Greg followed her, shoving his phone into his pocket. "Are you planning to go to that live event? Is that why you're so worked up?" India grabbed a shirt from the bed and started folding it, again and again, trying to keep her shaking hands busy. She was terrible at hiding things, and Greg knew that better than anyone. "I just want clarity," she said quietly, eyes fixed on her shoes, one leg bouncing with nervous energy. Greg sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling like a man absorbing a blow. "You refuse to make this easy for me," he said bitterly, gripping the bedpost. "You haven't exactly been the perfect partner yourself, dear," she snapped back. He slammed his hand down on the mattress. "But I tried. I did all that stupid stuff you asked for. Dinners, love texts, even bought you that damn desk to show you I support your writing. What have you done, India? Have you ever sacrificed for us?" "Oh, don't start. You did all of that after I left, not before. And I spent 15 years in a marriage with a man who thinks creatives are just hippies dressed like Harry Potter. Don't tell me about sacrifice, Greg. I begged you to come to countless open mics, and I quit the role of a lifetime just to make you feel like a man. So stop the pity party." His face darkened. "You're in love with him." "Oh, God," she shouted, rolling her eyes as she stormed toward the door. This back and forth exhausted her. Pretending things were fine had been their coping mechanism for years. Fake smiles to ease the ache of a dying marriage. But this argument felt different. It was final, like the moment before glass shatters. India busied herself again, finishing breakfast, cleaning the kitchen, prepping her bag for a meeting she'd almost forgotten about. Anything to escape the heaviness pressing down on her chest. She expected Greg to return, to keep arguing, to demand another round of explanations, but he didn't. He was quiet, too quiet. And in that stillness, something deep inside India began to stir, an unease she couldn't yet name. India finished rinsing the last dish and glanced toward the hallway. Still no sound. Not the creak of his footsteps. Not the usual impatient sigh he gave before calling her name. Just silence. She dried her hands, half annoyed, half worried, and walked toward the bedroom. "Greg?" she called softly at first. No answer. Her stomach tightened. The bedroom door was still halfway open, a sliver of morning light cutting across the carpet. When she pushed it open, the air changed. Heavier, colder. Greg sat slumped on the edge of the bed, one hand pressed against his chest. His phone was on the floor beside him. The screen cracked. Greg? She repeated, louder now, crossing the room in seconds. His face was pale, beads of sweat glistening along his forehead. He tried to speak, but the sound came out broken, strained. Then, before she could reach him, he crumpled sideways, body jerking once, then still. Greg! She screamed, grabbing his shoulders and shaking him. Her voice cracked into panic. She shouted for their daughter. Call 911, she shouted. Now, Sesame, go. Her hands trembled as she held him, whispering prayers and fragments of comfort that blurred together. Just a little longer. Just breathe, baby. I got you. But her voice was shaking. Her tears hit his shirt like raindrops, staining the blue cotton as his chest heaved beneath her hands. The sirens came fast, but not fast enough. When the paramedics burst through the doors, India's knees gave out. She stumbled backwards, sobbing as they moved in. One kneeling, one checking his pulse, another shouting for the defibrillator. What happened? One asked. I don't know. We were just talking and then he got quiet. Ma'am, step back, please. Another said gently, guiding her toward the wall. She clung to the doorway, refusing to blink, afraid that if she did, he'd disappear completely. They lifted him onto the stretcher, his head lolled to the side. His eyes, half open, looked empty, distant, already gone somewhere she couldn't reach. Greg! She cried as they wheeled him away, her own voice echoing down the hallway like it belonged to someone else. And just like that, her entire world, her past, her guilt, her unfinished love, collided into one unbearable sentence. The collapse. Backstage at the Grand Lyric Theater, Jante and Maya waited. The list of acts was getting shorter and shorter, their turn creeping closer with every minute. Jante called India 10 times, texted even more. Nothing. I know she was upset, Maya said, glancing at the clock, but it's not like her to just not show up. I've learned, Jante muttered, shaking his head. You don't really know what someone's capable of until they do it. This isn't her, Jante. I promise there's a reason. Maybe an emergency. It doesn't matter. He cut her off. We only get paid if we both show up. I booked a sitter. Now I have to pull from my emergency fund to pay her. I'm so sorry, Maya whispered, resting a hand on his shoulder. I knew this would happen, he said bitterly, but I got my hopes up anyway, and now we're stuck. No out. So I'm done. I quit. Please don't, Maya pleaded. She'll call. I know she will. When she does, he said, slipping on his coat, tell her I'm out. For good. He walked off before Maya could stop him. The ride home was silent, but loud in his mind. His thoughts spun, anger simmering just beneath the surface. He'd wanted so badly to apologize, to tell her that the man who snapped at her wasn't him. At least not the side of him he wanted her to see. The poem they'd written together was gold. Performing it with her always felt like an intimate exchange, filling each other's cup without ever touching. A divine rhythm, a love language spoken in verse. He'd never felt so connected to a woman without sex. And maybe that's what made it hurt more. Now, it was over. If he could have pushed past the argument, maybe she could have too. He thought they understood each other. But maybe that was wishful thinking. He pulled into the driveway of his small, cozy one-bedroom home, the one he shared with Rennie, and sat there in silence. Hands gripping the steering wheel, heart heavy, eyes burning, angry, disappointed, drained. Part 4, 1 year later. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. India sat on the edge of her bed wrapped in a robe that still smelt faintly of Greg's cologne. The silence pressed against her chest, filling every corner of the room where his voice used to live. The walls seemed to hum with ghosts, echoes of arguments, laughter, apologies that came too late, and love that didn't know how to stay. It had been a year since Greg died, a year since she found herself kneeling beside him on that bedroom floor, pleading with a God she barely recognized to let him breathe again. A year since the guilt took root in her bones and she refused to leave. Every day she replayed their last argument, the way his face softened before it went still, the words she didn't say, the ones she wished she hadn't. Sometimes she whispered them into the night, hoping maybe the universe would send them where he'd gone. But no amount of confession brought her peace. The grief was a shapeshifter. Quiet one day, cruel the next. Some days she woke up and almost forgot. Then she'd roll over and see the empty pillow beside her and remember everything she lost and everything she never gave back. She felt like she'd failed everyone. Greg for not loving him enough when he needed her most. Jante and Maya for walking away when they needed her to show up. Even herself for not knowing how to live with the pieces that were left. Her phone still held unread messages from Maya. Old ones. Thinking of you. We're worried. Please call. India never did. Every time she tried, guilt wrapped its hand around her throat and squeezed until the words died inside her. Because how could she explain that she didn't feel worthy of healing? How could she admit that a part of her still wanted Jante after her husband's death without sounding monstrous? How could she want peace when she'd been the storm? So she stayed alone. She cooked in silence, slept in silence, wrote in silence. Even her tears fell quietly now, polite, contained, almost disciplined. Sometimes she imagined Greg's voice in the stillness, calm, forgiving, like he finally understood everything she couldn't say while he was alive. Other times, she imagined Jante, that steady tone that used to ground her, that she now missed like oxygen. But she said nothing, did nothing, just breathed through the ache and tried to convince herself that this was what she deserved, a life of unfinished sentences and unspoken apologies. But maybe some love stories end not with goodbye, but with silence. Mirror verses. Time passed in fragments for both of them. A year had gone by, but the ache lived like a tenant neither could evict. Jante still woke up before dawn, sitting at his small wooden desk by the window with a cup of black coffee beside him. The house would be silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the even softer breathing of his daughter, Rennie, asleep down the hall. He always told himself he'd write something new, something bright, something home. But every time he picked up his pen, the words curved back toward her. It wasn't on purpose. It was something deeper, something his spirit couldn't unlearn. He wrote about longing, about second chances, about the kind of silence that still hums like music. And every poem ended the same, half finished. One line left open, one thought suspended in midair. He couldn't explain why. He just knew he wasn't supposed to finish it. Across town, India did the same. Every night she sat on her balcony wrapped in a shawl and surrounded by flickering candles. The soft hum of the city filled the air as she scribbled verse after verse in her journal about guilt, forgiveness, and the weight of unfinished love. Her words were fragile, but they bled truth. Yet, just like him, she stopped short every time. She'd write 3, maybe 4 lines, then pause mid-sentence, like she was waiting for something or someone to answer. I keep leaving empty space, India confessed in her journal, because maybe that's where he lives now, in the pauses I can't fill. She didn't know that on the same night, in a different corner of the city, Jante had written, some lines aren't meant to be finished alone. Maybe the silence between them is her. If either of them had seen the other's words, they would have realized it immediately. They were writing the same poem, different verses, same rhythm. Different pain, same pose. Their connection, that divine current that first sparked on the grand lyric stage, hadn't ended. It had only shifted forms. Now it spoke through ink, through the hum of midnight thoughts, through silence that still felt shared. On her loneliest nights, India would whisper lines to herself that felt like prayers. Sometimes she imagined him hearing them wherever he was, like the words might travel on wind. She told herself it was ridiculous, but every now and then the air around her balcony felt still, charged, and she swore she could feel him listening. Jante felt it too. There were nights he'd look up from his journal, certain someone had just whispered his name. Not the way people say it normally, but softly, with familiarity, the way she did. He'd close his eyes and breathe deep, trying not to give the thought power, but the truth sat quietly behind his denial. Even separated by miles, grief, and guilt, they were still riding toward each other, unaware that word by word, line by line, their separate poems were becoming one. That's Us was already been written, just not by one hand. It was a duet neither of them had rehearsed, but both had somehow knew by heart. The call to come home. Maya called Jante out of the blue. It had been a whole year since he'd heard from her. He wasn't ready to face the situation. Not her, not India, not the ghost of what could have been. He'd picked up on India's indecisiveness before, and it frightened him. She was fine when she was centered, grounded, but when her anxiety took hold, she shut down, and that made it dangerous for him to care. He assumed Maya was calling to talk about her, maybe to convince him to reach out again, but he had been healing, or at least trying to. And he didn't want to be pulled back into anything uncertain. He ignored the call and kept doing his grocery shopping, filling his cart with ingredients for Thanksgiving dinner. Just him and Rennie this year. Peaceful, predictable, quiet. Almost an hour later, he and Rennie pulled into the driveway, arms full of grocery bags. As they unloaded, a familiar voice called out, "So you're ignoring my calls now?" Maya. She was leaning against her car, arms folded, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. Before he could reply, she followed him into the house, hugging Rennie on her way in. "We go back too far for that, Tay," she said, using the nickname only his closest friends ever did. "This is my life now, Maya," he said, half defensive, half defeated. "I can't afford to be thrown off track for someone who doesn't know what they want. I've got a new job. I've been writing, healing. I shouldn't risk this right now. I can't risk this right now." His voice dropped on that last part, heavy, as if even saying her name carried too much weight. Maya slipped off her coat and hat, setting her purse on the table. Then she gave him that look, the one that always came right before she said something she knew might cross the line. "You have feelings for her," she said flatly, tracing her fingers along the edge of the wooden table like she was drawing a map for him to follow back to himself. "Give her a chance to fix this." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Before that mess with Chantel, I probably would have. But now, I realize I have to do what's best for me. Always." "Don't be that guy, Jante," she said, her tone firm but laced with care. "The one whose heart turns so hard that love can't find its way back in? The one who lets one bad apple spoil every sweet one waiting for you to taste it." Her voice cracked a little. She wasn't just talking about him anymore. "I'm doing what's best for me," he said quietly, like she said she was doing for her. Maya sighed, shaking her head. "You wrote that poem for her. You wrote that poem because you felt her. The drained spirit she carried, the ache that dulled her shine. You saw it, Tay. You felt it, and you wanted to lift it. What changed? You see her as human now? As flawed?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "Don't throw her away, Jante," she said finally, voice soft but firm. "You'll regret it if you do. Connections like that, real Alignment don't happen twice. You think you can let it go, but you'll spend the rest of your life searching for something that already found you. Don't let pride make you miss your merge. Her eyes glistened. Don't be like me and Oscar. The room went quiet. He understood the weight of what she just admitted. Maya brushed a tear from her cheek, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the door. By the way, she said, pausing just long enough to look back at him. They're doing the Grand Lyric Anniversary Showcase next week. They're bringing back the best performers for the last 5 years. You should be there. She left without waiting for a reply. Jante stood there in the silence, Maya's words still heavy in the air. He looked over at Rennie, humming softly as she colored, her feet swinging under the table. That sound, her calm, anchored him, even as his chest tightened. He rubbed his palms together, staring down at them. The same hands that had held loved and lost it. The same hands that had written about healing but still shook when he thought of India. He didn't know what scared him more, the idea of reaching for her again or the chance that she'd pull away. He'd been through that before. The effort, the hope, and the crash. And yet, what he felt with her didn't fit inside fear. It was bigger, softer, real. Maybe Maya was right about him, about the way he gets in his own way. He exhaled, pressing a hand to his chest, steadying the ache that always seemed to linger there. He wasn't ready to chase her, but he was tired of running from what scared him. And for the first time, in a long time, he just let himself sit in that truth. Quiet, unsure, but honest. The soft surrender. India had to dig deep into herself to find the strength to do this. Maya had invited her to a showcase at the Grand Lyric Theater, and though she hesitated at first, she knew she owed him, Jante, an apology and an explanation. She had simply vanished after Greg's death, disappeared into grief so heavy that it left her hollow. That wasn't who she was. She'd always prided herself on being steady and reliable, the one who showed up. But when Greg died, a piece of her faith and love died too. How could she face someone like Jante? Someone who saw her so clearly when she no longer recognized herself. The week leading up to the event was slow and sacred. India tried to rebuild pieces of her courage, one small ritual at a time. She wrote in her journal every morning, spelling out everything she'd been too afraid to say aloud. She walked for hours through the winding paths of her neighborhood, the sound of her boots tapping against the pavement, grounding her in something like rhythm again. She cleaned her apartment, organized her closets, and folded old memories like fragile linens. Things she wasn't ready to throw away but couldn't bear to touch anymore. Every space she cleared, every corner she dusted, made room for air to return to her lungs. Maya had been patient but persistent. She checked in every day, never letting India sink too far into her silence. When India finally confessed the full truth, the guilt, the confusion, the love she wasn't sure she was allowed to feel, Maya listened quietly, then said what no one else had the courage to say. You feel guilty, India, but you and Greg were never good together. That's what makes it worse. Hiding from what's meant for you won't make the guilt go away. You'll just end up hurting yourself and Jante, trying to keep a promise you already outgrew. India didn't respond right away. The words sat heavy in her stomach, uncomfortable but true. Maya continued softly. You can't punish yourself forever for surviving. You loved Greg the best way you could, and when that love changed, it wasn't wrong. It was human. That night, India couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, eyes fixed on the stretch of sky above her building. The stars looked dim, as if even they were tired of being wished upon. She whispered into the stillness, her voice cracking just enough to let the truth escape. Do I even deserve to love again? The question lingered, caught between fear and confession. For months, she had carried the belief that Greg's death was her punishment, that maybe, by wanting more, she had somehow summoned loss. But the longer she sat there, the more that belief began to loosen its grip. Because deep down, she knew the ache wasn't about punishment. It was about longing. Jante hadn't asked for anything from her. He hadn't demanded love or promises. He simply saw her without pretense, without performance. And that alone terrified her. Because being seen meant she could no longer hide behind guilt. She pressed her hand to her chest and felt her heart still beating. Slow, steady, stubborn. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't try to quiet it. Maybe she wasn't ready to love again. Maybe she still had miles to walk before she could say those words without trembling. But she could admit this much. What she shared with Jante was real, sacred, rare. And even if she wasn't ready to step into it now, she didn't have to run from it anymore. As dawn began to creep through the window, India closed her journal and whispered softly to herself, half prayer, half promise. When love comes again, I won't hide. They arrived. She sat in the car, nervously wringing her hands and biting her lip. A habit she could never break, especially when she was about to do something she dreamed about and feared all at once. This moment had been circling her for months, maybe even years. She knew it had to happen. The apology, the conversation, the collision of everything left unsaid. Still, her pulse danced like a drum line in her throat. She kept telling herself that if he agreed to come, that meant he was willing to listen. Maybe not ready to forgive, but at least open to hearing her out. She wasn't sure which scared her more, the chance that he might still be angry or the possibility he wasn't. As she looked up at the glowing marquee, Grand Lyric Theater 10-year anniversary showcase, her chest loosened just enough to let in air. The building shimmered like memory itself, gold lights reflecting off glass doors, velvet drapes spilling warmth into the lobby, and that familiar hum of anticipation that always filled the space before a show. This theater had held her joy once, and her heartbreak too. Yet, tonight, it felt different, like maybe it was holding space for something sacred to return. She smiled for the first time in weeks. It was small, trembling, but real. Grabbing her bag, she inhaled deeply and whispered, "You're here now. That's enough." And with that, she stepped out of the car, her heels tapping against the pavement like soft declarations of courage, carrying her toward the building that once felt like home. He sat in his truck outside the same theater, tapping the steering wheel to an old Jackson 5 song that played softly through the speakers. It had been a year, a full year, since he'd last seen her, and still, the thought of her had a way of sneaking into every verse he wrote. He wasn't sure why he agreed to this. Maya said it would be good for him. Closure. She called it, but closure had never been his strong suit. He'd rather write through it, bleed through it, than face it. He stared out the windshield, watching the crowd filter through the double doors, and wondered what she'd look like now. Would her smile still tremble before it bloomed? Would her eyes still search for safety before settling on his? He sighed, cutting the engine. His reflection in the glass looked older, steadier, maybe. But the moment his mind said her name, he was back in that space between almost and ache. What do I even say? He muttered. What could I say that she doesn't already know? Still, he got out. The night air was sharp, grounding. He walked toward the entrance, nodding to a few familiar faces, and handed his jacket to a crew member before heading backstage. The merge. The air buzzed with sound checks and nervous chatter. India stood near the dressing mirrors, adjusting her mic and steadying her breath, her reflection flickering under the soft bulbs. The door behind her creaked. She turned and froze. Jante stood in the doorway, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The noise of the backstage world dulled to a low hum. Her throat tightened, words catching somewhere between apology and relief. He gave a faint nod, not cold, not distant, just present. A small, unspoken truth passed between them in that quiet space. From down the hall, the stage manager called out, "You two are up next." India blinked, heart hammering. Jante took a few steps forward, close enough for her to catch the faint trace of his cologne. Familiar, grounding, disarming. He tilted his head slightly, eyes steady on hers. "You ready?" he asked. Her lips parted, breath unsteady. "Not really," she admitted. He gave a soft, crooked smile, the kind that always made her forget to guard herself. "Then we'll improvise." And just like that, they both turned toward the light spilling from the stage curtain, two halves of a story finally walking back into the same scene. The Grand Lyric Theater was packed, every seat filled, every breath expectant. India stood backstage, notebook in hand, trying to steady her pulse. This was her first time performing since Greg's passing, and though she'd rehearsed her lines for weeks, her voice trembled like it was her first open mic. Maya gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Just breathe," she whispered. "You two were made for this." Then she disappeared into the wings. Jante was already on stage, mic in hand. The applause faded into silence as he began to speak, but something felt off. The words hung heavy, the rhythm didn't catch, the connection wasn't there. India stepped out, joining him under the lights. They exchanged a look, brief but loaded. She could tell he felt it too. The poem they'd rehearsed wasn't landing. It was good, polished even, but it wasn't true. Then something happened. A pulse. That quiet telepathy that had always existed between them stirred awake. Jante lowered the page in his hand, eyes closing as he spoke from memory. Something raw, unfinished, familiar. The moon and the stars seemed so content. India froze. Those were her words, her unfinished verse. Without thinking, she stepped closer to the mic and finished it. Like even if God had written them apart, they would have found themselves together anyway, even on a different planet. The audience stilled. The sound fell away. It was just them now. Jante opened his eyes, surprise flashing before a slow, knowing smile took over. He spoke again, letting instinct lead him. Their words wove together effortlessly. His line, her answer, his rhythm, her echo. They weren't performing anymore. They were communing. The crowd leaned in, afraid to miss a single breath. Each verse mirrored the other, his grief meeting her guilt, her hope softening his pain. By the final line, the audience was on their feet, clapping, shouting, crying, feeling. It wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation. Off stage, Maya pressed a trembling hand to her chest, tears catching in her lashes. She'd always known. They were more than creative partners. They were pieces of the same poem, finally written whole. Under the lights, breathless and shaking, India turned to Jante. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. He reached out, lightly brushing her hand. The applause still roared as India and Jante walked off stage, hands brushing, breath still steady. The lights behind them dimmed. The echo of the crowd swelled, a wave of gratitude, disbelief, and love. Maya met them in the wings, eyes glistening, voice trembling with the kind of pride that only comes from witnessing something holy. She grabbed Jante by the arm before he could slip away. "Don't let her walk out that door." she whispered, smiling through tears. He hesitated, his heart still hammering from the stage. From her. I don't know what to say, he admitted, his voice low, almost boyish. Maya's smile deepened. Then speak the only language you both understand. She stepped back, giving them space. The theater around them faded into soft murmurs and the faint hum of music bleeding from the house speakers. India stood just a few feet away, clutching her notebook to her chest, like she always did when she was fighting the weight of too many emotions. Jante walked toward her, slowly, purposefully. Their eyes locked, a silent conversation years in the making. He reached for her hand, fingers trembling as they slid into hers, and in that single touch, the noise, the grief, the time between them, it all dissolved. He took a breath, steady but reverent. Then, softly, as if offering a prayer, and you know it's true. I'd cross a million timelines and swim through the grandness of the universe just to be paired with you. Her eyes filled instantly, one tear slipping free. It traced the curve of her cheek before falling against his knuckles. A baptism in quiet truth. India smiled, trembling, the words barely audible but eternal. I know. A hush wrapped around them, warm, sacred, final. Two souls, one poem, one sacred puzzle, finally completed. Two hearts ready to love, even in pain, even in despair, because soulmates aren't complete without each other. And in a loveless world, the bravest thing you can do is give of yourself fully, even when you're scared to.